And we are live. All right. First of all, if anybody's watching this live, right now there isn't anyone, please tell me that you can hear me. I want to make sure that the microphone is working properly and there aren't any real issues. Okay, I have a few people on. So guys, please say something in the comments if you can hear me. And if you see my lips moving and there is no sound, tell me that too. I would appreciate that. If you are watching this as a pre-recorded video, you do not need to comment and say that you can hear me well. Interestingly, it happens every time, regardless of what I say. Okay. All right. Thank you, folks. So it sounds like we are all good and you can hear me. I have some new people that I haven't seen before. Excellent. Working well for me. Wonderful. So we have video, we have audio. I think we are good. I'm going to give it maybe another minute or so, and I'll start talking about US optics. The specific two scopes that I've been looking at are these two. The FDN 17X, the 3.2 to 17 by 50 scope, and the Ts12. And I've laid them up this way intentionally so you get an idea of the difference in size. The TS is a much smaller scope, also a much less expensive scope. And they fit very different niches, and I thought that was interesting. So the application is going to be something I talk about a good bit. Okay. As a manner of general announcements, I've had several people comment in a few different videos. When is this review coming? When is that review coming? I really apologize. I'm late with a bunch of stuff I planned. I make these long-term plans and I plan shit out, and then life happens. What happened with me is really not surprising and not unusual. I had COVID back in December, took me out for just over 3 weeks. And then I had the vaccinations during the past 2 months that between the two of them took me out for another week and a half. So some things had to be done, and I am effectively, almost 4 weeks behind what my original schedule was. In practical terms, other family stuff's happening. I do apologize. It seems like I spend a little bit too much time apologizing, but I do apologize about the delay of certain devices. I'm doing my best to catch up. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to fully catch up, I think, until probably August sometime, because what happens is that I'm about to get on the road. I'm going to have a work trip next week. I'll be gone Tuesday through Saturday. The one good thing about that is that my work is going to take me to Midwest, and while I'm there, I'm going to go visit Vortex. They have a new training center called Vortex Edge, and I am going to go try to take a class there while I'm out anyway, and also see how all of that is going to pan out for me. I don't know how much time I'm going to have, but they are being very gracious in accommodating my occasionally psychotic schedule. They have some really interesting simulators there, including this 300-degree virtual training, Virtra, V-I-R-T-R-A, Virtra 300 simulator. Most of these are in government hands. I think there are only a couple in private hands, and Vortex has one of them. And I'm really looking forward to trying that. I'm going to try to focus on higher speed stuff, which is something, A, I'm not very good at, B, I don't do very much. So it will be very interesting to get some exposure to how they train and how they work, and see if I can make something out of it. Okay. All right. We've got a good audience, so let's start with US optics. All right. Let's start with the FDN 17X, this guy. Okay. It's an interesting scope. Optically, it looks to be not hugely different from the SN3 US optics that I've looked at a few times, quite a few years ago. The way US Optics Company originally back when they were still in Brea, California, just on the other side of Los Angeles from where I lived at the time. The way US Optics worked, they've made a couple attempts to be kind of a production scope manufacturer, but by and large, they were really a custom optics manufacturer. You could pick a million options and go build it for you. You could pick different types of parallax, different objectives, different reticles, different illumination. There's a variety of different things. That's not a hugely sustainable way to go. There are many reasons for it, but one of them is that a lot of people just don't want to wait. And also, a lot of people who buy these things don't really know what they're looking for. And making them configure stuff was not great. And the professionals who really know how to configure stuff, or at least people, not necessarily professionals, but people who do this, who have more experience and knowledge, that's not a large enough market to sustain a company, in my opinion. I could be wrong. One of the problems that I saw always with US Optics, one of the reasons I had not spent too much time reviewing different US Optics products historically, was that mechanically they were generally quite robust and generally well built. However, optically, it's not that they had issues. They were inconsistent. Some were really good, and some were not so great. And for a guy like me, and basically what I do here, I look at different stuff because I enjoy it, but then I try to make some conclusions so I can make a reasonable recommendation. For a guy like me, if I see this kind of variance in optical and mechanical quality, I can't make recommendations, right? Because if you get a good one, it's awesome. And if you get a bad one, well, it's not so good. So I sort of stopped. Then US Optics company was purchased, and there was a whole mess with that because I'm not privy to all the details, but there were a couple of lawsuits involved. And as a result of those lawsuits, US Optics ended up moving twice. First, they moved to Montana, and it looked like they were getting up to speed and everything. And then something else happened. Somebody, I don't know. I'm not. At some point, I read the brief for the court case a while back, but I don't really remember. It's not that important. And then the company moved again and ended up in North Carolina. Which is where it is now. In North Carolina, the company is owned by the same person who also owns Zero Delta, and they share facility manufacturing space. And the same company, to the best of my knowledge, also does some contract manufacturing and things like that. And there, the company seems to have stabilized and did a rework, or at least a partial rework, of the product line. Rebranded, redesigned the aesthetics, did a few good things there, and started making scopes again. And when I decided to take a look at them, I really had a choice to make. I was trying to figure out, do I treat this as continuation of the original US Optics? Because some of the designs, many of the designs are clearly related. Or do I essentially treat this as a new company? And I decided to treat it as a new company. And that's why I've had these two scopes for quite a long time, and I've spent a fair amount of time with them, like I would with any new company or with any truly new product, just to get a better idea. Because for all practical purposes, US Optics has been reinvented. And in my opinion, from what I've seen so far, I think it has been reinvented in a better way. I like these products. Nothing in this world is perfect, but they're quite good. And I think if all goes well, barring something unforeseen, I think they have a good future ahead of them. There's more work to be done, I'm sure, but I like what I see so far. These things are intelligently made. Okay. All right, I'm going to switch to the overhead view so that you can see the scopes again. I'll move the Ts12 to the side. And by the way, so there's 2 new magazines coming out. I've got a few articles in these. I just got them. I don't know if they're already at the newsstands or not, but they should be. I've got quite a few in the Red Dot magazine, like the parallax article and a bunch of other things, the magnifiers and some other stuff that's written by me. I think I've got 5 or 6 articles in this one and a couple in this one. But anyhow, so FDN17X. If you have as long of a history with US optics as I do, certain things will look familiar. And one of them is this new version of an ARAC knob. This was the original high quality knob. It was the best at the time, but resetting zero stop and stuff was a huge pain in the ass. Not anymore. Now it is easy to do. There are a couple of screws, and that's it, and you reset it. The clicks are really good. This is one of my favorite turrets that I've recently seen, and they're not very audible, but the feel is very solid and extremely tactile. And because the turret is of a fairly large diameter, the spacing between the clicks, this is a 10 click, 10 milliradian per, was it? No, excuse me, 10 milliradian. 11 milliradian per turn, my bad. Turret, and the click spacing is very good. Okay. However, since the turret is not very tall, it doesn't stick out too much. In practical use, this is one of the better turrets that I've seen lately. I don't think it's quite as good as Tangent. I think the new 10 milliradian March turret is a little better feel-wise, but this is very good. Unless you like turrets that are loud and audible. I don't, right? I need feel, but I'm going to put it right by the microphone and see if you can hear anything. But it's a very muted sound, but very nice feel. Okay. So this is quite nice. Generally, all the controls work well. The magnification ring is nice and smooth. It's large, so it's very easy to grasp without the whole eyepiece turning, like Night Force does and a few other things. I don't like it when the whole eyepiece turns, so this very wide and knurled magnification ring is easy for me to control. If you notice the way the eyepiece shape is, it has this slight convergence here. Okay. And that is one of the things that's interesting. I've seen this on hand-sold eyepieces before and some others. When you look through this scope on higher magnifications, there is very, very little. This black ring around the image is virtually non-existent. It's very nicely controlled. Okay. However, just like with the original US Optics scopes, when you go on lower magnifications to about 5 or thereabouts, about here, so a little bit less than 5, but 4.5. Below 4.5, there is a fairly significant tunneling, and the tunneling I don't like, and it's in about the same place where it was on the original US Optics scopes. So if you want to avoid tunneling, essentially it's a 4.5 to 17, 4.5 to 17 scope. That to me is a bit of a weakness. But like I said, Optic, I think they did some baffling and they made a couple of other optical changes to this design. I don't think there was a significant optical redesign. One of the giveaways of that also, if you look carefully, there's a seam here and there's even slightly different anodizing. This is not a single piece tube. Single piece tube usually has the main tube and the objective, all machined out of a single piece of aluminum. Here, the objective is a separate mechanical assembly. Originally, one of the reasons original US Optics scopes had this was that you could choose it with a different diameter objective, and then it was quite easy for manufacturing because you just mixed and matched pieces. I don't know if they plan to do something like that or not, but in practical terms, I know there was always people always claim that 3-piece tube is a major problem. If it's built well, it's not a major problem. If it's not built well, then single-piece tube or multi-piece tube is not going to help you. This one seems to be built well, and I have not really had any issues with it. But the scope is long. Keeping the scope long is one of the things that allows US Optics to maintain quite good optical quality, right? Without doing any really significant optical redesign. I'm sure they'll be doing something, but for now, they took the existing optical system, cleaned it up a little bit, reworked the mechanics significantly. The feel of the mechanics is quite a bit better than the previous stuff that I've seen, and put it out there. The windage turret on this guy is covered, which I like. What I don't like is how far it sticks out. So the cap is quite large, and the turret, the windage turret underneath it, is also quite large. It also has really nice feel. So I was, when I was using it, I was running it without the cap most of the time, because the cap is big. When I had it in the bolt action, if this was too close to the ejection port, I actually had some problems with the brass hitting the windage turret, and I didn't like that. It's not as much of a problem for me as it is for quite a few other people, simply because I tend to run mounts that are a little bit on the high side, just the way most rifles fit me. But if you like to mount the scope low, this is something to watch out for. Okay. In practical terms, I like the fact that the windage turret is covered. Honestly, I only ever touch the windage turret when I'm sighting the scope in. Beyond that, I either hold with the reticle completely, or dial elevation and hold with the reticle. Speaking of reticles, the reticle in this particular scope, they have quite a few options. Let me find the file and I'll pull it up on the screen. The reticle is called the JVCR. Here's an image that I lifted off from US Optics website. There you go. So it's basically a slightly abbreviated tree reticle designed by Jack Wibbard, a very well-known PRS shooter. I think he won it 1 or 2 years, always one of the top shooters. And the way the reticle works, let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. Let's see if it has the resolution. Guess not a very high resolution image, unfortunately. Okay. The way so I'll take some through the scope pictures and I'll post them. The way this thing works, so there are these thick horizontal lines at every 2 milliradian, and then there are dots in between. So it's a somewhat sparse milliradian tree reticle, but everything is sized correctly, and to me, it basically looks like sort of an improvement in many ways on the old Gen 2 XR reticle that US Optics also still uses. They must have had an original license to it, but Gen 2 XR reticles are only available from Tangent Theta, Schmidt, and US Optics. I assume these were the original licensees of the IP. And I will, let's do this. I'm just going to pull up the Gen 2 XR reticle to show you from US Optics website, and you'll understand what I mean. One of the reasons I suspect that I get along as very well with the JVCR reticle is that I have a lot of mileage with Gen 2 XR. And if you notice, if you look at the Gen 2 XR, it's a comparatively sparse reticle. You have these horizontals every 2 milliradian. And then, where's the JVCR? There you go, the JVCR. Here's the image. Basically, it builds on that a little bit, gives you a little bit more in terms of wind holds, gives you 0.2 milliradian wind holds, but still keeps it a little bit more sparse. So you're very unlikely of this reticle to block the bullet impact, something like that. And one of the other things that I like, if you look at this here, there is the vertical goes up to about 5 milliradian or so above center. And I found that very useful if I am nicely set up and I'm trying to see a bullet trace or bullet travel, stuff like that. It's very nice to have a reference mark in the upper half that tells you roughly where the bullet path is. You can kind of figure out where it is if you have a reference mark. So that works quite nicely for me. I spent quite a lot of time with this scope. I don't know how many rounds I fired with it. It's in 800 to 1,000 round range. I mostly had it on a 6.5 Grendel AR-15, but then I was also testing the new Savage Impulse rifle in 6.5 Creedmoor, and the scope I put on it was the US Optics because I thought they made a very good match. And there was a good amount 6.5 Creedmoor. I did not shoot it in any boomers, partly because I don't really own any boomers, and partly because I don't enjoy high volume shooting with stuff that beats the shit out of me. The eye relief on this scope is not very long. It's, I think, in a 3-inch range, which is more than enough for me. So I'm not looking for very long eye relief most of the time, unless I'm shooting something with a substantial recoil. For example, I'll be going to, I've got an elk hunt coming up toward the end of the year, and it's a muzzleloader elk hunt. And this is not a scope I would put in the muzzleloader, partly because of the eye relief. Even with a very accurate muzzleloader, I've got a barrel coming from Arrowhead rifles. I want a little bit more eye relief. I'll probably use one of the Vortex Razor Edge DLH T-scopes. I have a couple of them, and they have nice long eye relief that will work well. I would be careful about putting this on a boomer, but typical tactical rifles don't kick that much. They either shoot moderate calibers, or they are fairly heavy. So it hasn't really been an issue. Because of this fairly short eye relief, you have really wide field of view, even on as long as you're at the magnification that's above the tunneling, the field of view is very wide. One of the wider fields of view you're going to get in a scope. It's pretty much on par with the Tangent 3 to 15 and stuff like that. So which is very, very good. One of the complications with wide field of view rifle scopes is usually flare. The original US Optics SN3 that I looked at had really significant flare, and it was hard to control. With this one, it's either sample variation or they reworked the baffling inside the scope. There is flare. It's more than Tangent and a few other scopes here and there, but it is not hugely significant. I have not really run into major flare issues, and even a fairly compact sunshade still works well. I think US Optics sells the sunshade separately. I found one. So what happened, I did all the flare testing after I moved, so all my stuff was in disarray, and I found a sunshade that fitted. And I have no idea if it's just some other sunshade or a sunshade that came with the scope originally. I don't even remember if it comes with it. I lost the box. I've had this scope for quite a while, but the sunshade does help. The downside, of course, is that it is already a pretty long scope. Right, I'm grab a tape measure. So it is already a pretty long scope, and it is as is. It's almost 15 inches, right? And you add a 3 or 4 inch long sunshade to it, and I mean it becomes a seriously long design. Now I'm not planning to put anything in front of it, so it doesn't bother me. But if you were planning to put something in front of it, night vision, anything, I think this is not. I mean, it'll work if you have the rail space, but it's not really ideal for that. Okay. So without a sunshade, there is flare. It's not too bad. But if you're looking into the horizon and all that, there is a little bit of veiling flare, and there is off-axis stuff coming in. There is some stray light issues. They're not very significant, and for this price range, it's not hugely unusual, right? If this scope was $1,500, I probably wouldn't bring it up at all. But this scope is almost $3,000, so optically, there's really only 2 issues, and how major they are depends on your shooting conditions and what and your personal preferences, right? There is a little bit of flare and there is tunneling. I'm not, for where I would use this scope, I'm not hugely bothered by either. Flare is fairly nicely controlled by the sunshade, And tunneling for where I'd use the scope is probably not an issue. So now there are, after this overview, there are kind of two remaining issues. And like I said, if anything here you want addressed more carefully, please ask questions, and I'll be happy to before I move on to the next scope. But the two questions that kind of come up here are, well, is this a scope I can comfortably recommend? And what are the prime competitors? Who is it competing? Who's it competing against? Well, first, let's start on recommendations. I fully intend to add this scope with this reticle to my list of recommendations, because I think in this $2,900, $3,000 range, there isn't a huge number of options currently available, and this is a nice scope. Am I going to, one of the other type of questions I often get, well, okay, I get a lot of scopes. Am I going to keep this one, or am I going to eventually sell this one? I'm probably going to sell it. The reason I'm likely to sell it is that I have a good number of scopes like this, and I have a tangent data 3 to 15 by 50 that basically does everything that this scope does, except it does it a little bit better. But here's the kicker: the tangent is, I think, what, $3,800 or something, and this scope is $2,900 to $2,950, something like that. At a few places that sell them, I think your Optics Planet, a few here and there. I already have the tangent, and I'm gonna keep the tangent. If I was buying a new one, it would not be nearly as easy of a choice. I mean, that's what, $1,800, $1,900 price difference, and that is significant. So what are the really truly direct competitors for this scope? Well, in the $3,000 range, you have the Minox ZP5 3 to 15, which is a very, very nice design. You have the Night Force 4 to 16 by 50 and 4 to 20 by 50, two attacker scopes. They are in that same approximate price range. The Leupold Mark V 3.6 to 18 by 44. With illumination, it's a little bit less expensive, but it kind of gets in the same general price range. Okay. And there's not that much else, really. So where does this stack up against those? It's hard to say, right? I think Minox ZP5 optically is a little bit better, but mechanically, I really like the elevation turret on the scope. I think it's better than the Minox turrets that I've seen. And, it gives me a little bit more magnification, but you lose the low end. The US Optics does have a better reticle selection. I'm going to share my screen again, just so you guys can see different reticles that are available in the scope. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. So FDN 17 has 1, 2, 3, 4 Horus and non-Horus and Mule scale reticles, a few different versions, Mule and MOA, and you name it, and the AJ VCR that I liked, right? So there are 8 different reticle options. And in terms of reticle options, this is really one of the better designs that I've seen lately. And that is a big deal. I think the reticles available through this guy are better than what I get in the 3 to 15 version of Minox ZP5. I'm going to pull up that website just to make sure I'm not bullshitting, but if I remember correctly, the nice 3 reticle that Minox had was not available in the 3 to 15. It was available in the MR4 reticle. It was available in the 5 to 25, but not in the 3 to 15. I'm pulling it up. Give me a moment. Linux has a new website that I don't always know how to navigate. And of course, it took me to a different design that I wasn't looking for. Okay, you know what? I think I'm gonna have to go back and see, because Linux website looks completely different from what it was just a short time ago, and maybe they discontinued a bunch of stuff. Yeah, so maybe that's not really an issue anymore. But regardless, so there's always Night Force and others. Night Force Mule XT reticle, I think, is very good. So that is a real competitor. I don't like the whole eyepiece rotating on a Night Force, and US Optics does have a wider field of view. But that's a worthwhile comparison. I don't know overall how they compare optically attackers and ice scopes, but so is this one. So it's a tough call. It is good enough for me to comfortably recommend, and the reticle that I like is the JVCR. I think it's a very well executed reticle. It's sort of a nice, nice design. Okay. All right. Before I move on to the TS12, I've got a question here that I want to address. It's not terribly related to the US Optics story, but it's worth talking about. So Christian is looking for a 1:6 by 24 illuminated scope for driven hunting and a $700 to $900 price range. And he's considering a scope called Ultimax 1:6 by 24. So Christian managed to quote a scope that I've never heard of, which is not such an easy thing to do. And okay, it's a Nico Sterling scope. No, okay. All right. Something new from Nico. So, how much does it cost? Oh, there I go. So Christian's, since Christian's talking about driven hunts, okay, yeah. So that's probably a Light Optics Works scope as well. Christian, since he's talking about driven hunt, is very likely in Europe, where it is a little bit more common. And Philip pointing out a Trijicon acupoint, and he's right. That should be near at the top of your list. In the $700 to $900 price range, I'd be looking at a Trijicon acupoint. I would also be looking at Delta Titanium HD 1:6, and I will. So optomechanically, Delta Titanium HD 1:6 by 24 is a very similar scope to the Delta Striker, and Delta Striker would also work quite well for this. And I'm going to share my screen. This is, since I think Christian is in Europe, I'm going to pull up a page of a European retailer that I have run into before, Optics Trade from Slovenia. They're good guys. Theodore is a good dude. So it is about $800. So Christian, it's right in your range. It has the same basic 4A reticle. Just like what you've been looking for, it's a simple fiber illuminated dot. And for $800 or thereabouts for driven game, I think this should be at or near the top of your list. I think it will work quite well. I would be surprised. I would not be surprised if this scope and the Nikos Ultimax are products of the same basic OEM and may very well be related designs. But both have a very bright dot, quite good in one power, I imagine. I have not seen the Nico, but I've seen the scope, and it's very good. So I'd be looking at that and at the Trijicon. And it's actually a good point. We in the US are used to Trijicon scopes being reasonably affordable for what they are, but that's not always the case in Europe. I do not know what Trijicon scopes cost in Europe, but it's often more than they cost us. Okay, I don't see it here. Doesn't matter. You can look it up. But Philip is right. Trijicon acupoint should be on your list. Delta Titanium HD should be on your list as well. Okay. All right. With that out of the way. So that's it pretty much for the EOS Optics FDN17X. I like this design quite a bit. My real complaint in terms of packaging, really, well, scope is long, and I don't like how large the windage turret cover and the windage turret are. I prefer them to be more compact. But beyond that, I really enjoyed the scope. It's served me well. And when I do my next, once, twice a year, I do sort of house cleaning and sell off a bunch of stuff. And it's likely to be one of them. I'll be sorry to see it go. I just don't have that much of an application for it. Oh, something I did not mention. The scope weighs right around 30 ounces, I think, or thereabouts. 29.5, 30. So it is light enough to sort of fit in this category of products that I dubbed crossover scopes, which are front focal plane rifle scopes that are not huge and not hugely heavy. This scope is quite long, and it's got a lot of elevation adjustment, 35 mils. And there we go. There's the weight, 29.6 ounces. So it's just under 30 ounces. So it's just light enough to fit into this my self-imposed 30-ounce weight limit for a crossover scope. When I put it on the Savage Impulse Predator rifle, and if you look at the thumbnail of that I used for the scope, and I'll pull up a picture momentarily just to show you. Here we go. Okay, before I go to that, so Christian is, oh, you're in Canada now. Christian is now in Canada, but he is asking about European wild boar hunts. That's the idea for the driven hunting scope. So Christian, if you're in Canada, there is a very good Delta distributor in Canada, so I would talk to him. All right, so here's a picture of the FDN17 scope sitting on top of the Savage Impulse Predator. That's the version of the Savage Impulse that takes AICS magazines. And the rifle, I think, was right around 9 pounds. And the scope is about 30 ounces and 2 rings. So I was just under, with that design, I was just under 12 pounds. And when I was shooting that rifle with this scope, all I could think of was that this thing is damn near perfect for NRL hunter. The rifle was just stupid accurate. The scope fitted quite well. It could be mounted low enough, could be mounted high enough. Unlike with some other designs, I didn't really have, the way this scope was mounted, I didn't really have any significant issues with brass hitting the windage turret. And something about this combination of rifle and scope just clicked. It was really, the scope is really easy to get behind. It's quite forgiving. And the rifle stock was reasonably well adjustable. 6.5 Creedmoor in a 12-pound rifle is not really all that much. It does not have a whole lot of recoil. I mean, it's more recoil than typical, 20-pound 6-dasher PRS rigs. But by standards of hunting rifles and stuff, there was really no recoil to speak of. Under good conditions on 17 power, I could see bullet trace, even if the sun was behind me, so I could see the turbulence. I spent a good amount of time shooting plates with it in different conditions, wind and different lighting conditions and all that. And the scope worked really well. For applications for accurate gas guns or moderate weight bolt guns, where you're not looking for huge amount of magnification, this particular US Optics scope with a 17 power top end is really capable. I've always liked 3 to 15, 3 to 18, thereabouts scopes and guns like this for general purpose use. And this is one of those. It fits right in there. And if length does not give you problems, it should be in a consideration. It's just an easy scope to use, easy scope to get behind, and a really nice elevation turret. I think this was a very good match for it. I begged Savage to let me buy the rifle, but it was promised some other gun writer, so I had to send it back. Had I been able to purchase that rifle that I was shooting from Savage, I probably would have kept the rifle with the scope on it as is. The combination worked really, really well. Okay. All right, moving right along. So that's the FDN 17X. Makes a pretty good club if you need to hit something. That's one application where a longer scope works really well. The eyepiece is easy to get a hold of. You need to club baby seals or something. Should be good. But to give you an idea of the length of the scope, for example, so here is March 5 to 42 by 56. I'm going to put them side by side and give you a view from the top so you get an idea. Okay, US Optics, March 5 to 42 power, 3.2 to 17. This one is a little bit heavier, a larger objective, but the US Optics does have more forgiving depth of field, and I had to putz around with parallax a little bit less. Both are illuminated, right? I did not really love the push button illumination on the US Optics. That's not really my thing. I've talked about that in the past. I did a first look video for the US Optics, but I will freely say that it didn't slow me down that much. And in the end, it worked just fine. It didn't really give me any issues. But I do prefer rotary illumination controls. Okay. And if you're going to do a push button, do 2 buttons up and down. This whole pressing a single button to cycle through illumination levels is not something I like too much. Okay. Joe saying you should have taken it boating. I think he implies with that Savage impulse that I should have taken it boating. I briefly considered it, but I didn't. I blame my parents. They've instilled this certain sense of ethics and morals in me that have been a huge detriment for most of my adult life. It was tempting. That freaking Savage impulse was just remarkable. Really liked it. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So TS12. This thing is, well, I'll switch the camera again. So this thing is freaking short. Right now it is sitting in a Swamp Fox, something or other. I cannot keep up with their names. Rings. And I used it in these exact rings on an AR-15 without needing an extended mount. Let me pull up a picture for you. There we go. Hold on. Okay. All right. This. Okay. All right, since I've mentioned March and I have a question, let's answer this. Do those very high magnification range scopes like that March suffer from optical quality issues? Or are they carefully designed and high quality enough to avoid issues? So March, if you are looking for very high magnification, March is your best bet. They are really, really well designed and the scopes are absolutely excellent. But it's also, around, I think, $4,000, $4,200. If you buy a $300 scopes that goes to 50 power, it's going to be crap, right? It's pretty much, if you want something special, something unusual, you're going to spend the money. If you're willing to spend the money and you avoid some of the hucksters out there, there are a few brands out there that are just not very good despite being somewhat expensive. Optical quality is going to be good. March scopes are excellent. If you need high magnification, that's your best bet. But anyhow, so with US Optics TS12, this is a very conventional 223 AR-15. The scope is very short. I'm able to set it up in AR-15 height rings, and I still have a couple of Picatinny slots left. The eye relief of the scope is not very long either. I think it is also in the 3-inch range. I'm gonna pull it up so that I'm going to make sure I'm not bullshitting, just like with the FDN 17X that I just looked at. I think the TS12 also has eye relief that's not very long, and in the grand scheme of things, that's not a it's not a bad thing, and I will explain why. Yeah, it's in a 2.5 to 3-inch range. So the primary application for a scope like this for me would be on AR-15s, or it would be on rimfires. Okay, or on rimfires where I do not need all that eye relief. One of the nice things about eye relief that is not too long is that you can have really nice wide field of view or respectable field of view without having a huge diameter eyepiece, because these two are related. And the way this scope works, it's once again fairly easy to get behind, not quite as easy as the FDN scope, but it's quite easy to get behind. It is pretty comfortable on ARs. I think it's a very interesting option for gas guns. And if you look at this, the way I set this one up for most of the testing, this is a regular 556 AR-15 that this was sitting on. If you notice this rear sight here, I've got XS sights, XTI offset sights that I like quite a lot, right? And between the 3 to 12 scope or thereabouts and nice offset sights, so you could use a red dot, of course, it turned out to be a really nicely flexible application. Okay, Philip has correctly pointed out that the scope lever is still on. It was not still on, so it was on intentionally. This is one of the pictures I took for when I was getting ready to do a review of a fixed sticks scope jig. So it was quite intentional in the picture. For some reason, I couldn't find anything better, so I used that. Okay. And from Chen, March scopes are made in Japan. It's also a Japanese brand. So March is a Japanese brand. Yes, they are basically hand built Japanese scopes. Okay. Fixit, yes. So this particular gadget there is from Fixit Sticks. I talked about it a little bit when I did my video on scope mounting. It's called Scope Jack. I'll show you the page right now. Hold on a moment. Okay, so this is it. So this is the exact scope leveling thing you see, and it works quite nicely. I've had really good luck with it. I use it quite a bit when I have something right over the Picatinny rail. Okay. Okay. Anyhow, so the TS12. The scope itself, unlike the FDN, is made in China. So the FDN scopes, like this guy that I just spent all this time talking about, these scopes are assembled in the US. I think all the mechanical stuff is done in the US. I'm sure they buy lenses abroad somewhere. It's difficult to find lenses in the US. Not impossible, but difficult and expensive. But FDN scopes are built in the US. The TS scopes, like this guy, they are built in China. They externally, in terms of specs, they look really similar to scopes by a company called Vector. I've never tested Vector scopes, although I've seen them, and they look pretty similar. I do not know if there are any internal differences specific to the US Optics model, which is more expensive than Vector. But I do know that they do a very careful workup of these. careful workup. When you receive a scope from US Optics, there is a sheet there, what they checked, and it's done in the US, it's stamped in the US, signature of a technician who was looking it over. So best I can tell, both the scopes that are built in the US, the FDN line, and the scopes that they import, the TS line, are QC'd in the US. And that's kind of a big deal. One of the things that I do, one of the reasons I spend so much time when I'm looking at scopes from what I consider to be new companies, is that I want to see how multiple samples do, right? I'm not able to test, 20 scopes and get any sort of statistics, right? But I keep in touch with a lot of people, and I know quite a lot of people who have different versions of this. And by and large, the quality of the TS scopes and FDN scopes, for that matter, from what I've seen so far, has been quite consistent. Equally importantly, when there were occasional rare issues with either scope, the support team at US Optics took care of everything quickly and rapidly. There were quality hiccups before as the company was transitioning and all that sort of stuff. After they finally settled down and started moving, and started making stuff in North Carolina, kind of got up to speed and going, I've seen comparatively few issues where customer service was needed. But when it was needed, the universal, without exceptions, feedback I got from people who got to use US Optics customer service was basically, these guys rock. It was perfect, it was smooth, it was seamless, so the scopes are supported well. It is somewhat odd to see a Chinese-made scope from a company called US Optics, but on the other hand, if you want to extend your product line into something that more people can afford, you can't make it in the US. You just can't. This scope runs what I think $600 or $700. $6, I think. Hold on, let me look up the price and see. Why do I not see it? Yeah, it's about $600. Okay. You probably, occasionally there are deals, you can often find it better, but let's assume it's in the $600 range. You cannot really build a decent rifle scope for a market price of $600 in the US. And if someone offers you one, well, they're probably bullshitting. I mean, at least I have not really seen anything resembling an exception to that. Okay. Aside from being short, what else is worthwhile on this scope? Well, honestly, I kind of found it very worthwhile. The turrets are exposed, but they lock, right? This is so I'll put it by the microphone so you can hear it. This is the windage turret. In terms of feel, this is obviously not the same as the FDN scopes, but the elevation turret tracks. I didn't really check the windage turret. Both of them lock. These are louder clicks, but they are less solid. The turrets are fairly small external diameter. Okay. And it is 6 milliradians per turn, 0.1 milliradian clicks. It worked really, really quite nicely. This scope does have side focus, okay, and it goes down to less than, I think, 10 meters. I measured, I don't remember, but it did 10 meters comfortably. Depth of field is slightly on the shallow side, right? But it was workable, and magnification is moderate, so I didn't really have any issues with it at longer distances. But honestly, I did not treat this as a real long-range scope, but it can certainly work in that way. The reticle that I have in this scope is something called the MHR, and I will put that up momentarily. There are two reticles available in this rifle scope. The MHR that that I had, and something US Optics called some version of Plex, triplex something. It's a comparatively standard Plex reticle. Let me share my screen so you can see. There you go. Okay, so it's US Optics website again. So they have a Plex reticle of some sort, which has a couple of different lines here and there. Standard hunting reticle. I think it's a little bit on the thin side for a front focal plane scope, and this is a front focal plane scope. The reticle that I ended up using was this thing called the MHR, Mule hunting reticle, which basically a floating dot reticle and Mule scale, plus minus 4 milliradian on the horizontal, 3 milliradian above center, and 10 milliradian down. Nice, simple, clean Mule scale reticle. My only real complaint with this thing is that I wish the outer bars were a little bit thicker. I'll make it through the scope video before I sell this guy, so you guys can see. On 3 power, it gets pretty thin, and in low light, on 3 power, I can't really see this reticle. Okay. In decent light, it works quite well. For shits and giggles, I actually did some fairly quick shooting with it on 3 power, just offhand on an AR-15. It worked okay, but it basically just looked like a crosshair, really. It didn't really give me any issues. Combined with an offset red dot sight, something like that, the overall setup was capable. But I really missed having either thicker outer bars or some sort of a reticle illumination. If they were able to get some sort of maybe just a dot illuminated or the crosshair or something like that, I think it would really significantly add another dimension to the use of this scope on accurate gas guns, AR-15 type rifles, and stuff like that. Optically, I was shocked how nice this thing is. Given how small it is, how compact this thing is. There's a little bit of distortion. I know what to look for and all that, but at $600, and once again, given how short it is, I gotta say it's a nice design. The image is clean and crisp. There's some distortion, but it's well controlled. There is no distortion in the center, which is nice. On front focal plane scopes, one of the issues to always look for is to see if reticle focus changes significantly as you dial through magnification, because the reticle cell is in front of the erector assembly. This scope didn't have that. Given how short this thing is, I thought it would. It didn't, right? Because if you look at this, let me stop sharing, and I'll see. Right, if you look at this in a scope like this, the reticle cell is going to be usually right in front of the turret assembly. So the erector system gives you 4 power erect is just this long. It's really short. I thought, when I got this thing, I started looking at this. I thought, okay, I'm going to exercise the erector assembly a little bit, and I'll see some weird shit happening. I didn't. I mean, it really, really worked nicely. So I'm quite impressed. Once again, there are limitations to the scope. If it was illuminated or had a thicker outer bars in the reticle, it would be an easy add to my list of recommendations. But even as is, I'm kind of deliberating whether this is a scope I'm comfortable recommending or not. But if you're clear about the limitations, meaning reticle visibility on low power, this is really cool. For example, for lightweight but accurate 22, I think this scope is excellent. I mean, the side focus, the range of the image focus makes it really amenable for air guns, for rimfires and stuff like that, with a maximum magnification of, I think, 12. It's probably a good scope for field target hunter competition. I think there the 12x is the magnification cutoff, if I remember correctly. And tracking was quite good. Now, I did not push it all the way to the edge, right? So it's a 6 milliradian turret. I took it to 2 revolutions, and it worked quite nicely. There is no zero stop on this, and in this price range, I don't know if I would really expect one. My one real complaint with the elevation turret was that there is no revolution counter. So in practical terms, I'm sort of spoiled. I don't like to be guessing what elevation I'm on, so I'd probably limit it to single turn use. But 6 milliradians for a lot of applications is plenty. I mean, my Razer HD LHT scopes are 6 milliradian turrets. My Tangent Theta M scope is a 6 milliradian turret. And with a lot of conventional shooting that I do, I really don't need to go much beyond that, if at all. So that's been really an interesting design, and it was kind of when I was looking at the two scopes from the FDN, this guy. I mean, I expected it to be a nice scope. I was kind of nitpicking a little bit, looking for something is wrong with the Ts12. I had very low expectations going in, and I was absolutely wrong. It's a really nice, surprisingly nice design that never hiccuped on anything, really anything. I even messed with it a little bit behind a thermal clip-on, and it actually worked surprisingly decently once you collimate to the right magnification, stuff like that. It is just a nice little scope. Is it worth the money? Honestly, yeah, I think so. I mean, I look at these kind of scopes, right, and I like the category. Now, for example, there's this primary arms 2.5 to 10 by 44, and this, right, and the Ts12 3 to 12 by 44. Look at the size difference. I'll show it to you on an overhead camera view. Okay, so this is a primary arms 2.5 to 10 by 44. This is US Optics 3 to 12 by 44. The primary arms is a little bit more expensive. It is a more full-featured scope. It has illuminated reticle. It has a more sophisticated reticle. It has a zero stop and locking turrets and all sort of stuff. So ultimately, this is a better scope. Look at the difference in size and length. If you're going to put something in front of it, this guy is quite compelling. Or one of the things that does not get covered very much when we talk about short scopes overall, one of the things that does not get covered very much is the effect this has on balance. And because of where this scope is, and I'm going to share that picture again that I showed you earlier. Where's that thing? There. Okay. All of the weight of the scope, of the mount and everything, the scope is not very heavy. I think it's in a, I want to say it's in a 17-ounce range. I'll tell you momentarily. So, for example, it's lighter than even most low power variables out there. Where's this? Oh, there we go. It's 18 ounces, yeah. So it's about as heavy as a Delta Striker 126 and lighter than most low power variables. If you look at this thing, when you've gotten the AR, the weight is, the added weight is fairly far back. So for transitions, stuff like that, the balance also matters. It's not just the pure weight. And many very, very short scopes that I've seen in the past are not that light, because to get the optical system reasonably well calibrated with a short overall length, you very frequently end up adding some additional lens elements, and adding additional lens elements gets tricky, right? Because glass is actually quite expensive. That the shorter tube does not really have that much effect on the weight. I've got another scope of this general type that I want to put up on the screen for you, although it is an older design. This is one of my favorite all-time scopes, SWFA SS329 by 42, and I'm sort of working at a leisurely pace on a review where I am going to look at several scopes of this type. I'm waiting for a new Athlon to show up. They have a 2-12, and then I'll work on it in earnest. So here's a primary arms, 2.5 to 10 by 44, SWFA SS329 by 42, and the US Optics Ts12. It's a 3 to 12 by 44. If you look at the size differences, there are some packaging and handling advantages you get with a shorter scope. Just something to consider. Okay. How does the Ts12 stack up optically? $600 is pretty freaking good. Now, is it the best $600 scope optically that I've ever seen? No, but it's up there. Is it the best of the breed mechanically? I mean, I could use a slightly more tactile turret, maybe, but for locking turret on a budget, it is very good. And tracking was good. So I really don't know. There's not that much nitpicking, right? The only real complaint that I have, for this scope is that I would like to have better reticle visibility on low power, but this is a complaint. This is a complaint about the feature set, not so much about the execution. The execution of the scope is really, really good. Everything works. Everything is smooth. Nothing grinds. Nothing does anything weird. Minimal hysteresis, if any, in the parallax. Focus down to below 10 meters. For example, I found this scope extremely useful when I was doing dry practice indoors, because I can, in a large enough room, I can easily focus on a target taped to a wall across the room and do dry practice indoors. When it was cold in the winter, I found it extremely useful. I don't know. I mean, with both of these US Optics scopes, what happened is that when I first got them, it seemed like they seemed nice enough, and I played with them, and the more I used them, the more I liked them. Right? They didn't give me excessive eye fatigue. Optical quality was quite good. Whatever shortcomings they have, I was easily able to work around, and given the price, the shortcomings are not really that big a deal. And I walked away from this going like, okay, well, I've seen 2 products from this effectively new company, and I like them both, and I should probably look at more. I don't think I will this year, maybe toward the end of the year. I'm kind of packed, but they're legitimately good, and I may have some philosophical differences with them in terms of feature set and some stuff and things like that, but that's just that. That's not an issue of execution. The execution on both scopes, I think, is quite good. Right? And to reiterate, what does it compete at in this same price range? Well, honestly, the big question here is this scope worth the premium over the what looks to be very similar vector scopes, right? And I don't remember offhand what vector scope costs. My buddy Alex from Affordable Optics reviewed them, and I think he liked them. And so let's see, Vector Optics Veyron. No, that's second focal plane. Let's see which Vector Optics scope. Vector. Let's see. The big question is that. There we go. So there is a Vector Optics scope that is 3 to 12 by 44 that looks broadly quite similar, some different aesthetics, stuff like that, but looks very similar. And I do not see how much it costs. Okay. Let me see. I'm sure I'll be able to find something. I think it was in the $400 range, while this guy is Okay, that's not the same scope. But I think it was in the $300 or $400 range, while this guy is in the $500-600 range, depending on what kind of discount you're going to get. So the big question is that is there anything really different inside, and is this scope worth the price difference? And I can't easily answer that for you because I have not seen the Vector scope. And with Vector not having this US-based QC process to make this determination, I would really have to look at a good number of samples to figure it out. I may undertake that at some point. I have a collimator. I can comfortably go run through and test a few scopes. But I don't know. Even at its $500-600 price, I thought it was a very, very worthwhile design. All right. With that out of the way, I know there are a few questions here, so let me look through and see what I missed. I haven't looked at the screen for a little bit. If you guys have questions on anything I just said about US Optics scopes or anything else that comes to mind. We've been at it for about an hour and 10 minutes. I'll stick around for a bit longer and take whatever questions you may have. Okay, there we go. Prawn Wolf would like to hear how the TS compares to the LHT. Pricing is competitive. So the LHT, the Vortex LHT scopes are 3 to 15 by 42 and 3 to 15 by 50, and they are second focal plane scopes, while the TS scopes are front focal plane. So it's not entirely an apples to apples comparison, a little bit of an apples to oranges thing. Vortex LHT, in terms of build quality, optical quality turrets, is a higher end scope than the TS. But it's easier to make second focal plane scope, right? So I don't know how fair a comparison this is. I have both 3 to 15 by 42 and 3 to 15 by 50 HDLHT scopes, and optically they outperform the Ts12. I have not seen the other TS scopes, so I really don't know how those stack up. And mechanically, also better feel. The HDLHT scopes have covered windage turrets and exposed locking elevation turrets with zero stop. So other than a different location of the reticle, different focal plane, HDLHT is a more full-featured scope, a more expensive scope that was made in Japan at a very, very nice OEM. So they're better scopes, but they're not front focal plane, and so it's kind of a different ballgame. John Creasy. Bought this scope for my AR-1522 build. Love it for what it is. Yeah, this is so a semi-auto 22, like AR-22 clone or something like that, is a really good application for the Ts12. The parallax range is good. Optical quality is good. I think it's I think there's a niche for this scope where there's not a whole lot of competition, and this may be one of them. Joe, if you dial up near the limit of the elevation, does the distortion still miss the center? I did not run it all the way to the edges of the elevation range very much and didn't explore it there very much. The way the turret is set up with no zero stop and no elevation counter, I do not think it is a good idea to use the scope near the adjustment range. You do start picking up distortion. You also start picking up shading like you do on quite a few scopes, but that is primarily there on low power. If you're on high power, it's somewhat cleaner just because of the way the optics they work. But this is, if you plan to run it to the edge of the elevation adjustment, I don't think this is a scope for you. I don't think it's set up for it. I think you're asking for trouble. If you do that, there are better options out there to give you that. Okay. Chen, shorter scopes are lighter in general. Is that the biggest advantage? So no, shorter scopes are not really lighter in general because a lot of the weight comes from additional lenses, and a lot of shorter scopes actually have more lens elements than longer ones. The biggest advantage is just the fact that they're shorter. If you're using a clip or anything else, it's easier to put something in front of you. It gives you somewhat more favorable balance. On some platforms like AR-15s, if you don't need to use cantilevered mount, it's mostly a packaging difference, really, more than anything else. There's usually not a whole lot of weight difference. Joe, do short scopes feel like they have something to prove? I don't know if I look like a rifle scope psychologist, but my insight into what short scopes think is somewhat limited. I've seen a lot of short people who have a Napoleonic complex. I'm not so sure that short scopes do, but anything is possible. Good question. Some of those Crimson Trace scopes midways blowing out look pretty short also. Yeah, some are like 2 series, I think. There are a couple that were very compact designs, but that's not the same OEM. Those are different OEM. And I haven't really looked at those too much. That's why I'm here, to catch any tidbits of info on the March 1.5 to 15. Well, March 1.5 to 15 is really nice. But it's it's a $2,700-$2,800 scope. Really flexible scope, also a very short scope and very well worked out scope. If you need a short, broad magnification range, second focal plane scope, March 1.5 to 15 with like an MTR5 reticle or something like that, it's probably the best available right now. More windage and elevation. I'm not sure what that is referring to. I wonder if that's a comment on advantage of shorter scopes. It's possible. So with shorter scopes, if the objective lens is well designed, it's easier to have a lot of windage and elevation adjustment in a fairly compact design. I don't think TS12 have any sort of huge amount of elevation. I think it's about 30 mils. Yeah, it's about 30 milliradian, which is really quite good for a compact design like this. But while the scope has a lot of elevation and a windage adjustment range, I don't think the turrets are set up to exercise that all that much. Would the TS12X survive a Springer? I'm not entirely sure. I have a vague recollection of them saying that it's designed to survive Springers, but I really don't know. It's a question to ask US Optics. I don't own any Springer air guns, so that's not something I can easily test. Should probably pick one up. Philip, do you feel US Optics has regained some of the reputation they lost? I think they are regaining it. I think they're working on it, and from what I see so far, they deserve to regain that reputation. I kind of like what I'm seeing from them right now. I mean, support is good. Scopes are looking good. It's this is sort of their first foray after all the turmoil of changing ownership and locations twice and all that sort of stuff. I think once they get a little bit more established with this, I'm sure they'll try to make some modifications, come up with some new designs. So as much as I like what I'm seeing so far, I'm really curious to see if they, as a company, are capable of bringing on something really new and more modern than, for example, the FDN scopes that do have a legacy optical system. And that once they are able to successfully do that, that will really redeem them in my eyes. But even as is, I mean, I kind of like what I'm seeing. Okay. Doug, given the choice, would you choose rings or a Aerotech type mount in circumstances where both would work? So I'm not entirely sure what Aerotech type mount is. I assume you mean a single piece mount, like, this, for example, that's a March mount, so that's a single piece. So given a choice where I do not have weight limitations, I prefer single piece mounts. What happens is that with split rings, the rings clamp onto the scope rail and onto the scope body. And if there is any, because there are more connections, it's easier to have a tolerance stack up. Most modern single piece mounts are machined from a single piece of aluminum, so the rings are really nicely concentric unless they really screwed something up. So typically I see few issues with that. But with high quality rails and scopes and rings and all that, it's not really a big difference. But given a choice, I'll go with a single piece mount when the opportunity is there. Prone Wolf, how many scopes do you have for review this year? Oh, crap, I have no freaking clue. I'm so lost, I have no idea. I can see 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So in my office, most of the optics are in the workshop. In my office, from where I stand, I can see 18 different optics. Ooh, I forgot about binoculars. 19, 20, 21. 21 different optics that I need to say something about and do so reasonably carefully. And there is more in the garage and the workshop. So I am screwed. There's a lot of stuff here. Trent, sorry, more windage and elevation than the other scopes that look the same. Yeah, so with shorter scopes, it's easier to get a lot of windage and elevation adjustment. But one of the things that happens to be careful with shorter scopes, while it's easier to get more adjustment, it's not easier to get well corrected adjustments. What that means is that with many scopes, as you start going to the edges of the elevation, distortion becomes pretty significant. And in shorter scopes, it's harder to control. Clearly not impossible. People do it even in moderately priced scopes. But it is a potential complication. Okay. All right. I think they should rebrand Chinese scopes as them optics. Us optics, them optics. That's actually pretty good. It's not bad. Yeah, the whole business of Chinese scopes is always brought up. I know quite a few people who absolutely refuse to buy anything Chinese, and I can't understand why. I agree with some of it. I disagree with others. That's this whole separate topic for conversation. But I'll honestly admit that I am more particular about very techy stuff, that I don't want the Chinese to have optomechanical, comparatively simple optomechanical devices like rifle scopes. I don't think I'm really that concerned, but it's a huge market and you can decide what you want to go with. Most rifle scopes are made in China, Philippines, or Japan, and depending on how much you want to spend, you can usually find something that works for you. Okay. All right, I think that took care of the questions I had. Prone Wolf, that's a lot of glass. Looking forward to the reviews. Yeah, that is a lot of glass, and like I said, there's more in the workshop. And how much of it I'm gonna get to and how quickly, I don't know. Like I said, I think there's just too much crap laying around here. I need to be wrapping up with this stuff and sending it off. I mean, within this office, remember, I didn't count thermals. I only talked about optomechanical stuff. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different thermal devices that I can see from here. So I don't. Some of those are not for reviews, but there's a lot to do. Remember, I also do some consulting here and there, so that also takes my time. And there's a day job and the whole wife and kids thing. Little things. True, little things. Both of my kids are still pretty young. It takes time, and I do my best. And when I do review, I don't want to half-ass it. I actually have to spend time with these things and look at them carefully. Partly because I think that's what you guys expect from me. I can grab a scope, look through it twice and bullshit about it for half hour. That's easy, but I don't think that's why any of you are here. So if I take on something for review, I give it my best. Unfortunately, giving it my best takes time. So, all right. It's been an hour and 25 minutes, about an hour and a half. I'll stick around for a few more minutes. It's interesting. Everybody watching is on YouTube, nobody on Facebook. Maybe Facebook stopped advertising me. Wouldn't surprise me. And yeah. So while I wait, there's always, life always brings in additional complications to life. I talk about this for those of you who are new. I think most of the names are familiar. For those of you who do not know me, I have a website that serves as my blog, and as I go along, I do more and more content there. To read most of the stuff is free, but if you want to post and comment, there is a paywall, and I put it there primarily to get rid of the trolls and all the Twitter and other nonsense. That's sort of my home on the internet. So if you haven't been on, please stop by, make a username so that I know who you are. And so that's where I talk about various different things that come to mind. One of the things that is troubling me right now is the exact thing that Joe just brought up. How about them Palestinians? I have a lot of family in Israel, and my day job is based sort of in Israel. For my day job, I run a U.S. division, U.S. subsidiary, it's not a division, separate company of a larger Israeli company that makes all sorts of optical test systems and stuff like that. So all these Middle Eastern entertainment that's happening in Israel right now is troubling, right? My wife and daughter were supposed to go to Israel in June, so we just canceled the flight. I don't know what the hell's happening there. Well, I know what the hell's happening there, and I don't know when it's going to slow down again. So it's hard to say. Philip has correctly pointed out that they're not known for optics. No, they're not. And Paul Infinity. Okay, so you're a subscriber on my locals website. Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's kind of where that's my home on the internet. That's the place I check first. When I try to address everything, forums and YouTube and Facebook and all that, but my first stop is the locals website. But all this stuff in the Middle East is troubling, and it has some rather unexpected impact. Not unexpected, but it adds significant amount of unpredictability to my life, because I need to go to Israel. I haven't been there in a long time. I haven't been to the factory in a long time. My grandmother in Israel died in December, and I would like to visit her grave, and it's not real practical right now because the local Arabs have been, even if I did make it to Israel, there is kind of you have to go through a road in the desert to get to the place, and the local Arabs have been stalking the road and throwing rocks and passing cars and stopping them and beating the crap out of the passersby and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah. So this is sort of a complication for me. In the meantime, I'm still going to Alaska. Like I said, June 6th, I'm going to go to Alaska, do some bear hunting and fishing. And I'm considering not taking my computer with me just to get my mind off of stuff. We'll see how it goes. All right. Mr. Alan Garcia. Hey, big guy, let's go shooting sometime near Route 66 Casino. I'm not sure where Route 66 Casino is, but should be somewhere nearby. I'm in Albuquerque, so I think Alan, if I remember correctly, is not far away from me, about 20 minutes. So I shoot at Zia primarily, and I shoot at Bighorn, so you're more than welcome to join me. How is this Swamp Fox Trihawk? Very good, actually. Really good. I did a video on a Trihawk and Burris RT3 a little while back. It is, I just looked through my YouTube videos. It wasn't that long ago, and there's a good picture of it. They say it has the best eye relief. It is very forgiving. It's a very easy scope to get behind, and it has very wide field of view. It's not a compact prismatic. It's a good size scope, but it is very, very good. So if you're in a market for a 3-power prismatic, I think Swamp Fox Trihawk in terms of bang for the buck would probably be at the top of my list. It's not that heavy. It's about 15 ounces, I think, or about right around a pound together with the mount and everything, a battery. So it's not bad. Really easy to get behind, very easy to see reticle. I think it's a very nicely worked out design, and I have not seen or heard of too many of these failing. So the durability seems to be quite good. You love Alaskan June. Bring bug spray. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar with how Arctic countries, areas do in the summer in terms of bugs and mosquitoes. Long sleeves and bug spray, lots of it. But I think it's worth it. Okay. So, where are we with that? That's largely that in US optics and the crazy vagaries of my life. Once Israel settles down again, I'm probably going to have to go spend 2-3 weeks there. Originally, I was planning to go in July, August. Now I have no idea. One of the interesting things about what's happening in Israel, current festivities are because Hamas decided they have too many rockets and they need to use some. But behind it, there is a power struggle between two terrorist organizations, Fatah, PLO, whatever you want to call it, and Hamas. So they are trying to sort of prove to each other who hates Jews the most. The organization we have not been hearing too much from lately is the Hezbollah in Lebanon, on the north of Israel, just another side of Israel. And what I'm more than a little concerned about is if they decide to join in and Israel ends up having to fight in both fronts, this could take quite a while longer. So I don't know what's going to happen. Well, I've got a couple of new questions. It would be interesting if you one day were able to do a Guns of the Dark Lord episode with a hoplite Aspis and 375 Swiss P and see what scope works best for 2,000 to 2,500 yards for you. So I don't currently own any hoplite rifles, although I've been thinking about it. I'm friendly with the guy who runs the shop there, and they have some really interesting designs. I'm hoping to bring him on to the live cast at some point. But one of the things that happens is that on YouTube and Facebook, I cannot have a gun in my hands or any of the guests to show you. Excuse me. Locals is going to have live cast functionality, hopefully before too long. I know it's already in beta and they've been experimenting with it. Once they do, and I don't have that limitation, I'm going to bring the guys from Hoplite Arms on so that we could really look at what they have and go through, so I could ask them some questions about their guns and the new cartridges they're working on and stuff like that. But that would indeed be very interesting. As far as for 2,000 to 2,500 yards, honestly, I've done some amount of shooting fairly far away. Not quite that far away, but close to it. And so tangent 85 to 25 by 56 at the moment would be my choice for the ultra long range, I think. Although March is definitely a contender for that, but I'm probably still going to stick to tangent theta for now. Philip, how do you rate the reticle design for Swamp Fox? compared to some of your other reticle work, Optic, etc. Well, I haven't designed any reticles for SwampFox yet, so I don't know which reticle you're thinking of. Some of the reticle designs have some input from me, but they're not my designs. They ask a question and I'm happy to answer, but I have not designed any reticles for them. As far as the reticles I designed for different people that are comfortable with me mentioning it, honestly, I think the best precision reticle I've designed so far is the reticle. It's in the smart scope that I was showing you. The reticle is called FML TR1. It's a sort of general purpose 3 reticle. When I was designing it, the application that I really had in mind is the 4.5 to 28 by 52 scope, which should be here somewhere. Hold on. I think this guy's it. No, that's also 5 to 42. Where's the other one? I have no freaking clue. It's here somewhere. They have a 4.5 to 28 by 52 that I really like, and the reticle was designed for that, but it also works really well in the 5 to 42 by 56. I think the FML TR1 is the best precision reticle I've designed to date. There are a couple of things I do differently now in retrospect, and I'll use that in the next design. But I like that one. I think that's the best one. With the Bushnell OLP being allegedly discontinued, what would you recommend as a micro 1-power prism? Most 1-power prisms seem to be fairly bulky. And astigmatism being the primary concern. So yeah, there are several designs coming that look interesting. LOLP was too small. The image was too small compared to the housing, and it didn't work all that well, and some issues with the reticle. Of the stuff that's currently on the market, I think the best one is the SwampFox blade. It's not tiny, but it is quite good, easy to get behind. The reticle works. I think they did a lot of good things right with it. Primary arms, it's supposed to have a new 1-power prism that has a very clever optical system, best I can tell, but I haven't seen it yet. It should be just now coming out. It's actually a good point. I need to check with them and see when it's going to be here. And there are a couple of others in the works that are also coming. So if you want a compact one, you may need to wait a little bit. If you're okay with, was it 10 or 11 ounce weight of the SwampFox blade of the stuff that's currently available, I think that's the best one. Oh, there they go. Philip says microprisms are an area that is going to explode soon. And why would you say that, Philip? Well, Philip is generally right. I don't know if I'd use the word explode, but there are several interesting new modern designs coming. The question that is not clear with most of those is that whether they'll get the reticle right. Most tend to use reticle designs a little bit too thin and stuff like that, or not featured enough. You can do a fair bit even with the unity magnification prismatic. I think SwampFox got it right. I have a suspicion that primary arms in the upcoming 1X prismatic is going to get it right. And there are some others, we'll see how they do. But I don't know if I'd call it an explosion, but before too long, we'll have some good options. Do keep in mind the supply chains are still a little bit limited. Everybody has a hard time getting inventory, but that should settle down toward the end of the year, I think. Okay. Oh, there we go. Philip's saying, because it's a generation advancement, we have bulky prisms, and other companies are designing micros at this time. I think we're just at the beginning compared to what you will see within 5 years. I think it's going to take less than 5 years because a lot of the designs are already out there. There are two, excuse me, my nose itches. There are two sort of core types of prismatic scopes, small prism and large prism. And I did this video on 3-power prismatics, looking at Burris RT3, which is a small prism design, and SwampFox Trihawk, which is a large prism design. SwampFox is also going to have a line of small prism designs, and there are quite a few out there from several OEMs. To get a very wide field of view, you need a large prism. But in a low magnification thing, you can often get away with a smaller prism. And I suspect we will see both large prism and small prism designs kind of persist. Probably the classic small prism design was the ACOG 1.5 power, compact ACOG. I have one of those and like it quite a lot. But those are expensive. We are getting a new generation of Chinese prismatics that will cover both small prism, small and light, and large prism, medium weight, wide field of view designs, and I think they're going to be competent. Okay. Yeah, Trijicon makes a compact ACOG. They have two 1.5 power models, 1.5 by 24 and 1.5 by 16. I have the 1.5 by 16 and like it quite a lot. But it is fairly expensive. So the big question here is what is going to happen with Chinese small prism designs, because there are several coming. Okay. I wouldn't mind a fixed larger power prism to use with a piggyback dot. So when I had Mike Branson from SwampFox on the livecast, he actually talked about that exact design. They've got a large prism, 5 power prismatic. It's going to be a pretty beefy prismatic with a red dot sight directly attached to the housing. So you have basically, if you rotate a little bit, you have 1 power or 5 power. And I have not seen that one yet. But based on how good their other new prismatic scopes are, I expect that to be quite good as well. All right, guys. 5 more minutes. If you have any more questions, I'll be happy to address those. Otherwise, I need to go see what my kids are up to. They've been unsupervised for a couple hours. But the house is not burning. I don't see smoke. I don't smell anything burning, so we should probably be okay. But time will tell. I will once again reiterate. So for those of you who have not been on my locals site, please do stop by and subscribe. I do appreciate that. For all of the people like me who talk about guns and Second Amendment and occasionally politics and stuff like that, for all of us, our time on Facebook and YouTube is slightly limited. Nowadays, we are numbered. Eventually, they will all push us out. We'll find other social media outlets here and there. But in order to sort of control the content I create and the discussions I want to start, I have to have my own place on the web. And locals.com is the free speech platform that is providing that for me. So if you haven't been there, please swing by and subscribe. I would really appreciate that. Okay. Correct, Philip. Yes, SwampFox has a 5 power prototype. It's an interesting question. Favorite modern iteration of the longest running, still viable scope design, and why is it this WFA 329? Well, it's WFA 329. This guy is a really competent design that is really reliable, has good optomechanical quality, and they keep on making it. A lot of rifle scope companies tend to find a design that works really well, that sells really well and everything, then they feel a need to start changing it. SWFA hasn't done that with some of their core designs. The longest running still viable scope design is probably SWFA 10 power. The core design has been around since the 80s, I think, and still works well and still good for the money. The price hasn't changed. That's probably it. Of what is my favorite long-running scope design, you're right, there's WFA 329, simply because it's a little bit low on frills, but it works, and it works every time. And that is that is sort of a big deal. But I will say also, though it's not quite as old, but the Tangent Theta 3-15, the M scope, and its predecessor, Premier Light Hunter, it's a really nice design. It's been around for quite a while, and I expect to be using it. I don't know, like I said, one day it will be pried from my cold dead hands, I think. I want you to give you a softball at 10. You don't have to take it easy on me. I'm a big boy. All right. Thanks. I hope Biden doesn't screw up Israel. Well, he already kind of has. All these, so Trump froze all the funding to Palestinian authorities and Hamas and all the rest of the regional assholes. And one of the first things that Biden administration did was release that funding, which is arguably why they felt the need to spend some rockets, because they have the money to buy some more. So if you wonder whether Biden and his company of his merry band of lunatics and anti-Semites and his administration, if they had something to do with it, they have. Not that indirectly, really, but that's the world we live in. For all of those people who thought that Trump's mean tweets were a major problem, well, now we got Biden. I hope you're happy. Philip signed up last month. Thank you, Philip. I really appreciate it. Okay. All right. With that having been said, we're at 1:46. I was originally planning for this thing to go for no more than 2 hours. So if you have any other questions you want me to address, I'll stick around for a couple more minutes. And then I will log off. This will become a recorded video. And we'll go from there. On Tuesday, I get on the road again, so I'll have limited availability. But I'll be checking the locals website even through my cell phone just to see if there's anything that needs to be addressed. Okay. Oh yeah, so I mentioned earlier that I'm going to swing by Vortex and maybe do a little bit of shooting there. Just I hope I will. With my work, it gets interesting. So the facility, if you have not seen it, and I'm going to share the screen, is called Vortex Edge. And let's see, where is it? There we go. So it is new. It is really cool. They have a outdoor and indoor facility. And they have a 100-yard indoor range and all sorts of really interesting stuff. And if you look at the facility, there's a lot of interesting. I'm looking for a particular picture. Okay, so this thing on the right, it's a simulator room. That's that 300-degree simulator. That thing is really cool. I don't think I'll be able to do the shoot house or 1,000-yard stuff. I think the class they have running next week is the Carbon class, how to use low-power variable scopes, which maybe I can join that for a little bit. And I really want to try the simulator room. That is going to be a blast. Okay. So if you're not familiar with Vortex Edge, take a look on the Vortex website and check it out. I have no idea how much classes cost and any other sort of stuff. I don't know. I saw the facility briefly before they opened. I thought it was really world-class. I've seen a few over the years. And they're doing something right. And we'll go from there. I keep on saying we'll go from there a little bit too much. Maybe I need some new vocabulary. Since there aren't any more questions, I am going to end this and see what my kids are up to. For all of you guys who joined and asked good questions, I really do appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your willingness to spend it with me. And you have a good what's left of your weekend.